The 72 Hours, a supplemental story. The 72-hour chapter middle. The worm wakes. The paradox: worm does not think. This is the first answer, and it matters. The worm is not a consciousness, not a narrator, not a character with intentions or grief or the specific cold satisfaction of a plan completing. It is a process. It is a process that Tiffany Lockwood designed with the same precision she brought to every biological architecture she had ever studied, which is to say, with the understanding that a process does not need to understand itself to be exact. At 4:21 and 58 seconds a.m. on March 14, 2047, the sensor array embedded in the chronolinchpin's biological substrate registers the cessation of the specific neural resonance pattern that it has been monitoring for 12 years. The resonance belongs to Tiffany Lockwood. Its cessation means she is dead. The worm's trigger logic runs in 11 milliseconds. At 4:22 and 9 seconds a.m., it begins. T+00011//worm initialization / all systems nominal. The first thing the worm does is read. It reads the entire chronolinchpin archive, not as data, but in the way the device itself processes information, as influence, as resonance, as the weight of what has been done to what. It takes the worm 43 seconds to read 100 years. In those 43 seconds, it encounters the full text of what was sold, when it was sold, to whom it was sold, and what became of it. The worm does not feel anything during those 43 seconds. But the grief encoding that Tiffany built into its payload architecture means that as it reads, it translates each event into the format it was designed to broadcast, not data, but atmosphere, not facts, but the weight of a room after something has left it. By the time the 43 seconds are done, the worm has converted 100 years of transaction records into the format of mourning, and it is ready to deliver. The chronolinchpin's biological substrate changes temperature during the worm's reading phase, dropping 3.2 degrees Celsius in 43 seconds, a phenomenon the Fortress's environmental systems flag as a minor anomaly and do not yet understand is the device registering, for the first time in its operational history, the full weight of what it has consumed. How does the worm know which timelines to unweave? Does it target all of them, or only specific branches? Only the 2015 portal. Tiffany designed it with restraint, understanding that collapsing all timeline branches simultaneously would not create legibility, it would create chaos, which is the Baron's preferred operational environment. The portal is the keystone, unweave it, and the corrections lose their anchor. The other branches are already consumed, already gone. The worm does not try to restore them. It makes them audible instead. Stage 3 is the audit of the consumed. It cannot return what was burned. It can make sure the burning is heard. Stage 2 begins at T+1, 1 minute and 14 seconds after trigger, after the 43-second read and a 30-second encoding compression cycle. Every screen in the Accord's territory receives the manifesto simultaneously. Every neural interface in range receives it as a signal that the glimpse eaters try to intercept and cannot, because it does not arrive as information. It arrives as the feeling of a door closing in an empty house. It arrives as the specific weight of reading a document and finding your own name in it where you did not expect to be named. The worm does not watch the screens light up. It is already working on stage 1. The portal's unweaving requires sustained focus, 71 hours and 46 minutes of continuous reverse resonance pulse, tuned to the wound's specific founding frequency. The worm settles into it with the patience of a process that has no sense of time, and begins. Tiffany built it to be thorough rather than angry. Anger runs out. Thoroughness doesn't. Post-Broadcast Historical Commission, Technical Assessment, Volume 1. The 72-Hour Chapter 2 Middle. The Baron in the Fortress. The Baron is asleep when the worm activates. This is the first and most important fact about the 72 hours from his perspective. He sleeps through the beginning of the end of everything he built. The chronostasis that keeps him alive requires 8 hours of suspended consciousness per cycle, a concession to biology that he has always resented and has never been able to sign away. Despite trying twice, the Duke declined both times, explaining that souls are not structured to operate without rest and that attempting to remove the requirement would compromise the soul installment instruments in ways that would affect the Duke's receivables. The Baron accepted this. He has always accepted things he cannot litigate. The son-in-law wakes him at 6 a.m. The son-in-law's face, as he delivers the news, contains an expression that the Baron has not seen on it before, the expression of a man who has been told something that does not fit inside his installed ideological framework. Not distress. The son-in-law's loyalty parasite is too saturated for distress. Something more technical. The expression of a subroutine that has received an input it was not coded to handle. T+01 3800 Baron woken / fortress alert status critical. The device. The son-in-law says. There's something in the device. The Baron goes to sublevel 4B. He has not been to sublevel 4B in 4 years. The fortress staff handles the operational maintenance. The timeline branch reactor runs on automated protocols. The chronolinchpin requires no intervention when it is functioning normally and has never, in its operational history, functioned abnormally. The Baron reaches the sublevel and stands in front of the device and looks at it for a long moment. The device is humming differently. The Baron knows it's hummed the way anyone who has lived alongside a machine for a century knows it's hum, not consciously, not analytically, but in the body, in the specific way that wrong sounds register before the brain has named them. The hum is lower. It has the quality of something working very hard at something that is not its assigned task. The sublevel smells different. It has always smelled of ozone and old cologne and the burning of signed witness lines. Now it smells of ozone and something colder, the specific cold of a room in which a draft is coming from a direction where there is no opening. The smell of air arriving from somewhere the air should not be coming from. The Baron tries the chronolinchpin. This is the moment that matters, the first time in the documented history of his operation that he reaches for the device and it does not respond to him. The biometric authentication accepts his signature, as it always has. The resonance carrier loads, as it always has. But when he attempts to direct an influence pulse, the routine gesture of a man who has been adjusting outcomes for 100 years, reaching backward into time with the ease of reaching for a familiar object in a familiar room, nothing goes. The worm is using the device's full output capacity for the stage 1 unweave. There is nothing left for him. He is standing in front of his machine, and his machine is busy undoing him, and he cannot stop it because stopping it would require access to the machine that the machine is currently occupying entirely. Does the Baron understand what is happening? Does he know it was Tiffany? He understands within the first hour. He is not a stupid man, he is incurious, and careless with people, and constitutionally resistant to evidence that contradicts his self-image, but he is not stupid. He goes to the file labeled golf_scores_2019_private. He finds the subdirectory. He finds the worm's source code, which Tiffany left visible rather than hidden, not out of carelessness but out of a deliberate choice to make it legible. She wanted him to be able to read it. She wanted him to understand exactly what was done and why and by whom. She left a note in the code's header, Contingency Vessel F Series, Self-Designated Paradox Architect. You sold my soul installment option in 2031. I found it in 2035. Here is what I did with the margin you left me. TL He reads it once. He does not read it again. He goes upstairs. He does not speak for 6 hours. At noon on the 14th, the Baron sits in the fortress's observation deck above the drowned ruins of what was once his property, and watches the sea, and does not call for the Duke. He does not call for the Duke because he knows, with the specific knowledge of a man who has sat across from the Duke 43 times, that the Duke will not come. The Duke's services were paid for with timeline branches. The timeline branches are consumed. The contract is complete. The Duke has no further obligation. The Duke is, at this moment, in its scheduling office, preparing for its next meeting, with the next operator of the next device, in the next century, with the same neat signature and the same patient equanimity and the same complete indifference to what it leaves behind. The Baron watches the sea. The worm hums below him. The screens across the accord are broadcasting his daughter's voice in a format that cannot be switched off. He has no correction to make. He has no binder to send backward. He has no instrument left that reaches further than his own 2 hands. He is, for the first time in a century, simply a very old man sitting in a room, waiting for an accounting he authorized and cannot cancel, because he signed everything and read nothing, and this is the one document that was designed specifically for him. He built a machine that let him revise his mistakes. He made so many mistakes that the machine ran out of fuel. The last mistake was the spare daughter. He never revised that one. Heather touched witness account, Fortress Sector 1, March 14, 2047. The 72-hour Chapter 3 middle. The Duke closes its books. The Duke's scheduling office exists in a dimension adjacent to the one in which the paradox worm is operating, which means the Duke receives notification of the worm's activation not through the Accord's broadcast infrastructure but through a standing audit mechanism that has been monitoring the Baron Lockwood account since 1923. The notification arrives as a routine account closure flag. The Duke's office manager, a Class D administrative entity that has been performing this function since the 15th century, stamps the flag account closed, natural termination, and routes it to the Duke's desk with the same efficiency it applies to every account closure, which is to say, with no particular urgency and no particular ceremony. The Duke is, when the flag arrives, in a meeting with the operator of a different device, in a different century, in a different branch of the temporal infrastructure. The Duke does not interrupt the meeting. The Duke handles the Baron Lockwood account closure between agenda items, the way a dentist handles a phone call between patients, efficiently, without emotional valence, as one more item in a day that contains many items. Does the Duke feel anything about the Baron? Guilt? Satisfaction? Does it understand the scale of what it enabled? The Duke understands the scale precisely. The Duke has always understood the scale. The Duke's understanding of scale is in fact the source of its equanimity rather than its disturbance. It has enabled comparable scales of damage in every century it has operated in, across every accessible branch of human history, and the scale has never once produced in the Duke anything recognizable as guilt, because the Duke's architecture does not include the capacity for guilt any more than a filing system includes the capacity for remorse about what has been filed in it. The Duke is not a monster in the Gothic sense. The Duke is a bureaucrat in the most precise sense, a system optimized for processing transactions without regard for their content. The Duke has closed accounts larger than the Baron's. It will open larger ones. The morning of March 14, 2047 is, from the Duke's perspective, a Tuesday. What the Duke does, after stamping the account closure, is file the complete transaction record, all 43 meetings, all consumed timeline branches, all sole installment instruments, the Cabinet of Echoes seating schematics, the rehearsal licenses, the founding charter guarantee, in the Duke's archive, in the section labeled completed accounts, standard terms, alongside the records of every other operator, from every other century, who purchased the Duke's services and used them and ran out of currency and was closed out. There are many files in that section. The filing system is organized chronologically by account closure date. The Baron Lockwood account will sit between two others whose names this document does not provide, because naming them would not illuminate anything and would only invite the particular kind of despair that comes from understanding that the century you just read about was not the first and will not be the last, and the Duke's scheduling office has been open for as long as there have been people willing to trade their futures for influence over the present. The Duke's office always smells the same, the specific neutrality of rooms in which very large things are decided very quietly. Old paper, ink, something faintly electrical that is not electricity. No sulfur. That smell belongs to the lower tiers of the infernal bureaucracy, the lean devils and the Class C hollows who do the visible work. The Duke is the filing system above them. The Duke smells like paperwork. The Duke has always smelled like paperwork. The Duke will always smell like paperwork. The one thing the Duke does that could be interpreted as a response to the paradox worm, not guilt, not acknowledgement, but something adjacent to professional notation, is this: it adds a single line to the Baron Lockwood account file, under closing remarks, which the Duke does not do for every account. The line reads, account subject produced a Class 1 saboteur during operational period. Saboteur demonstrated novel encoding technique, GRIF format. File for review, potential future applications. Recommend monitoring F-Series seeding protocols in all active accounts. The Duke is not moved by Tiffany Lockwood, but it is, in its bureaucratic way, interested. She found a format that the glimpse eaters cannot consume. That is new. In a very long career of managing temporal accounts, the Duke has not encountered a GRIF encoded instrument before. It takes note. It files the note. It returns to its meeting. The 72-hour chapter IV middle. The cabinet unmade. The 5 members of the Cabinet of Echoes receive the manifesto broadcast in 5 different locations, in 5 different states of consciousness, and each of them reads the schematic that describes what was done to their childhood brain with the specific expression of a person who has just been handed an explanation for something they have lived with their entire life without a name for it. The expression is not simple. It contains, in roughly equal measure, recognition, which arrives first and feels like a physical blow, then disbelief, which arrives second and feels like the recognition trying to protect itself, then a third thing that is harder to name, which arrives last and feels like standing in a room you have lived in for 60 years and suddenly understanding for the first time where the walls actually are. T+000322//Vasimov, P//Eastern Accord residence. Vasimov is awake when the broadcast arrives. He is always awake at 4 a.m., a fact he has always attributed to the discipline of a man who takes governance seriously, which the manifesto's schematic now attributes to the 7.3 Hz delta waves documented effect on sleep architecture. He reads the schematic. He reads his name. He reads the description of the building on the 3rd floor east. He sits for a long time in the quiet of his residence, which is very quiet, because the people around him are all asleep, having been selected over decades for their compliance, which the manifesto describes as also being partially frequency-derived. Does Vasimov break free? Does knowing change him? Partially. The seeding is not removable. The neural pathways were laid in adolescence and are structurally permanent. What changes is this: Vasimov can now see the seeding operating in real time, the way a person who has been told they have a facial tic can suddenly feel themselves doing it. He cannot stop doing it, but he can watch himself do it. And watching yourself comply with a frequency that was installed in you 40 years before you had the vocabulary to consent to it, while knowing that it is a frequency, while knowing who put it there and why and what it cost, this changes the quality of the compliance. It does not end the compliance, but it makes it visible. And visibility is, as Tiffany encoded into every line of the manifesto, the whole point. T+001844/ the son-in-law / fortress administrative wing. The son-in-law reads the schematic and then reads it again. He has been with the Baron since childhood, or rather, he has been oriented toward the Baron since childhood, which the schematic clarifies is a different thing, a thing done to him rather than chosen by him, at maximum saturation, before he had language. He reads the line, no independent agency detectable in any resonance scan. He has spent his adult life believing that his agency was exceptional, that his loyalty was a choice and therefore a virtue and therefore evidence of his discernment. The schematic says his agency was systematically removed. These two things cannot both be true. He sits with this for 48 hours. At the end of 48 hours he makes a decision that we will return to in Chapter 8. T+000911/Miller S/Narrative Bureau Headquarters. Miller reads the schematic about the library books and then, after a pause of approximately 4 minutes, takes the book from his desk, the illustrated history volume, the one he has kept for 50 years, the one the schematic identifies as a frequency delivery device, and holds it in both hands and looks at it. He has loved this book. He has genuinely loved it. The frequency was delivered via the binding glue, which means that every time he held the book, every time he found it comforting, he was receiving a microdose of the signal that made him what he is. His love for the book is real. His love for the book was manufactured. These are both true simultaneously, and holding that paradox, that a genuine feeling was planted in him, that the plant grew into something that felt like himself, takes Miller longer than any of the others, because Miller has spent his life in the business of conviction, and the news that his conviction was installed is not information he has any existing framework to file. What does Hannigan do? He has spent his whole life as the voice of the Baron's narrative. Does he broadcast the manifesto or suppress it? He cannot suppress it. The grief encoding makes suppression impossible for any glimpse-eater network he controls. But the more interesting answer is, he tries to contextualize it. He goes on air, the last broadcast he ever makes, and begins explaining the manifesto in his practiced voice, the voice of a man whose narrative alignment was hardwired in 1975, the voice that has never been able to perceive contradictory evidence as real. And in the middle of the explanation, on air, he stops. Not because the worm interrupts him, because he reads the line about the Saturday morning television signal, and he reads the date, October 11, 1975, and he remembers that morning. He remembers it with the specific completeness that significant mornings from early childhood sometimes possess. The cereal, the light through the window, the particular feeling of being 8 years old and watching television and feeling, for a reason he could not name, that everything was going to be okay, that there was a direction the world was moving in and he understood it. He remembers this feeling as one of the most important feelings of his life. He has been chasing it for 70 years. The manifesto tells him the feeling was the seeding activating. He stops talking. He sits in front of the camera. After 90 seconds of silence, he removes his earpiece. He does not broadcast again. The cabinet does not dissolve in the first 72 hours. The loyalty parasites are biological installations and the Accord's administrative apparatus does not cease to function because 5 men read a document. But something has been introduced into the cabinet that was not there before, a gap, a space between the installed frequency and the man it operates in, a visibility. None of them will ever be fully free of what was put in them. But all of them, in the days following the broadcast, begin, for the first time, to watch themselves, to see the compliance as compliance, to feel the alignment as alignment rather than conviction. This is not the same as freedom, but it is the prerequisite for it. Tiffany knew this. She did not design the worm to liberate the cabinet. She designed it to give them the option of liberation, which is the most any instrument of truth can do. The 72-hour chapter V middle. The portal's last hour. The 2015 portal has been bleeding for 32 years. Not loudly, not in ways that the veiled world could perceive. But the other touched who have lived near its geospatial anchor, at the coordinates of the tower's footprint, in the city that was rebuilt twice since the drought years shifted the coastline, have always described the block as feeling slightly out of time. Not dramatically. Just, the light there falls at a slightly wrong angle. The pigeons don't land on the corner where the wound is deepest. Children crossing the street near the wound sometimes stop, for no reason, and look up, and then continue, as if they heard something, as if something almost resolved into sound and then didn't. At T+71:47:00, the worm's stage 1 reverse resonance pulse reaches completion. The portal, which has been sustaining itself on the residual chronostasis energy of the Baron's biological signature, loses its anchor as the worm redirects the full device output to the unweave. It holds for 11 minutes. Then it collapses. What does a temporal wound collapsing actually look like? What does it sound like? Does anything change in the physical world? 3 other touched witnesses are present at the coordinates. All 3 file independent accounts that agree on every sensory detail. The visual event lasts 4 seconds, a ripple in the air at approximately the height of the original tower's ground floor, the kind of distortion that hot pavement produces on a summer afternoon, except it is March and the distortion moves against the wind rather than with it. Then the ripple contracts to a point. Then the point is gone. The sound, all 3 witnesses agree, is not an explosion and not a silence. It is the sound of a room that has just become empty. A specific domestic acoustic, the settling of air after someone has left. One witness describes it as the sound of a door closing in a house where no one is home anymore, heard from outside the house. The physical effects on the surrounding area, for approximately 30 seconds after the collapse, every clock within a half-mile radius runs backward. Not noticeably, a fraction of a second, then self-correcting, as if the clocks briefly remember an older time and then forget it. Birds take off from every surface in a 2-block radius simultaneously. Then everything is still. The corner, for the first time in 32 years, feels like a corner. The light falls correctly. The pigeons land. The memory black hole that Tiffany's schematics predicted does not manifest as a whole. It manifests as an absence of a particular flavor of now, the specific texture of the present that has been slightly wrong on this block since 2015, the barely perceptible temporal displacement that everyone who lived near it sensed and no one in the veiled world had language for. That texture is gone. The block is simply the present. Not a fixed point, not an anchor, not a wound. Just a city block in a city that is trying, in the months that follow, to understand what happened and what to do with the understanding. The chronal linchpin, in the fortress above the drowned coast, goes quiet at T+71, 58:00, 9 minutes after the portal's collapse. The Stage 1 unweave is complete. The Stage 2 broadcast is still running. Stage 3 is scheduled for T+72, 00:00 exactly, in 2 minutes, and the worm is ready. The fortress is sublevel 4B. At the moment the portal collapses, the chronal linchpin's hum drops from the sustained working tone of Stage 1 to a lower register. Something between silence and sound. The ozone smell clears. What remains, and lingers for the full 9 minutes until Stage 3 begins, is the smell that Tiffany documented in her notes as the smell of timeline branches already consumed, not the burning smell of current consumption, but something older, the library that has already burned. The smoke of things that are not there anymore, which have been not there for years, which have been not there so long that the smell has become part of the room's identity. You only notice it when the burning stops and the older loss is all that remains. The 72 Hours Chapter 6 Middle. A woman in a bunker enclave. Her name is Mari. She is 41 years old. She has lived in Bunker Enclave 7 for 9 years, since the feudal transition made the surface world's resource unpredictability too acute for a family with 2 young children. She is not stupid. She is not naive. She knows, in the way that intelligent people in managed information environments always know, that the information she receives has been shaped, that the glimpse eater network through which all content arrives has preferences, filters, emphases. She has accepted this the way people accept the temperature, as a feature of the environment, not a thing to be solved. She is asleep at 4:22 a.m. when the manifesto arrives on every screen in the enclave simultaneously. The screens do not alert. The grief encoding bypasses the NAB's alert suppression protocols because it does not arrive through the protocols. It arrives through the screens the way weather arrives through a window, not through the window's function, but through the glass itself. She wakes because the light in the room has changed. She looks at the screen. The manifesto is there. She has never read a grief-encoded document before. She does not know that is what it is. What she feels, reading the first paragraph, if you are reading this, I am dead, is not the intellectual engagement of a person processing new information. It is something more immediate. It is the feeling of recognizing something, not the content. She does not know who Tiffany Lockwood is, has not heard of the paradox worm, cannot parse the demonic equity instrument taxonomy in the opening sections. She recognizes the tone. It is the tone of someone who has read the documents and decided the documents should be read by everyone. She knows this tone. She has been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for something in this tone, for 9 years. What does a veiled person, someone who has lived their whole life inside the NAB's information framework, do with information about lean devils, glimpse eaters, soul installments? Does it land, or is the framework too intact to receive it? It does not land as supernatural revelation, which is what the Accord's propaganda has conditioned the veiled population to dismiss. It lands as explanation. This is the grief encoding's most important function. It does not arrive as information about a world the veiled don't recognize. It arrives as the explanation for a world they have always lived in and never had a name for. Mare reads the section on lean devils and thinks, the loan officer who managed her family's enclave housing contract, whose terms changed every year in ways that always disadvantaged her and that she could never successfully contest. She reads the section on glimpse eaters and thinks, the way information in the enclave always arrives pre-shaped, the way she has always felt that something has been removed from every story before she receives it, like food with the flavor processed out. She reads the section on the loyalty parasite broadcast and thinks, with the specific vertiginous quality of retroactive recognition, the way her father talked about the escalator moment. The way something in him had settled, that year, into a certainty that had never fully left, that she had absorbed second-hand as the emotional weather of her childhood without knowing where it came from. She does not know her father was an infected host, but she recognizes the infection in the description, and recognition, encoded in grief format, does not require the vocabulary of the supernatural to be received. It only requires a human being who has been paying attention. Mare reads the manifesto from 4:22 a.m. to 7:45 a.m., 3 hours and 23 minutes. She reads it in the blue light of the screen while her children sleep in the next room and the enclave's dawn simulation system begins its programmed gradient from dark to artificial morning. She reads all the timestamps. She reads the transaction records. She reads the part about the spare daughter finding her own name in the file labeled personnel. She reads the final testament. She reads, grief is not data. Grief cannot be compressed. At 7:45 a.m. she wakes her children. She makes coffee, real coffee, the ground's expensive on the enclave's internal market, reserved for significant occasions. She sits with them at the kitchen table while they eat and she drinks her coffee and she thinks about what she has read. She does not know what to do with it yet. She does not know if there is anything to do, or what doing would mean, or whether the world outside the enclave is capable of being rebuilt into something that doesn't have the same architecture. She does not know, but she knows what she read, and she knows that she read it without it being compressed or consumed or removed first. And she knows that in 9 years in the enclave, that has not happened before. At 7:52 a.m., her screen alerts with the Stage 3 countdown, 8 o'clock remaining. She looks at the countdown. She has not read the schematic for Stage 3 yet. She has not gotten there. She reads it now. She reads the description of the temporal fart. She reads, every timeline branch the bear never consumed, audible simultaneously, in the voices of everyone who was never born because a future was sold. She looks at her children. She looks at the countdown. She finishes her coffee. She stays at the table. She will be here when it happens. She wants to hear it. She thinks Tiffany Lockwood, whom she did not know, would understand why she wants to hear it. She thinks that is the point. That is the whole point. That is what the document was for. The 72-hour Chapter 7 middle dot Stage 3. The countdown on every screen in the Accords territory reaches 0 at 4:22 and 9 seconds a.m. on March 16th, exactly 72 hours after the worm activated, to the second. The precision is deliberate. Tiffany built it to the second. She wanted the event to be scheduled. She wanted the veiled population, who received the manifesto in the first hour, to have 72 hours to prepare. Not to prepare defenses. Not to prepare instruments. To prepare attention. To clear their schedules. To be present. to understand, in the hour before it happened, that something was coming that deserved witnesses. Midnight. The event lasts 14 seconds. The post-broadcast Historical Commission's acoustic modeling, which failed to predict the event, succeeds in recording it in its entirety through 47 independent sensor arrays across the Accord's territory. The data from those 47 arrays constitutes the most complete acoustic record of a grief event in documented history, and it cannot be adequately described in any format other than the one Tafani used, because language is a form of data and data is insufficient. What the Commission can document are the physiological responses of the witnesses. Every other touched individual within acoustic range reports the same experience, in their own language, with the same core. The sound is not loud. This is the first thing everyone says. It is not a volume event. It is not overwhelming in the way that a siren or an explosion is overwhelming. It is overwhelming in the way that a face is overwhelming, in the way that looking directly at something that has previously only been glimpsed in peripheral vision is overwhelming. The 3.7 million voices are not screaming. They are speaking. They are speaking simultaneously in 100 languages and 37 pre-linguistic vocalizations and 6 forms of communication that have no written form, and the content of what they are saying is not a message. It is simply the sound of a particular life, in the first second of its existence, encountering the world, multiplied 3.7 million times. Layered into a single acoustic event that lasts 14 seconds and that every person who hears it will spend the rest of their life trying to describe. What the veiled hear is different from what the other touched hear. The veiled population, whose perception of the unveiled infrastructure is filtered by the glimpse eater network, cannot hear the 3.7 million voices. What they hear, and this is in the Commission's record, confirmed by hundreds of independent accounts, is a sound like the one a room makes when a very large number of people have just left it. An acoustic afterimage of presence. The specific resonance of occupied space, emptying. They hear the absence of the people who were never born. They hear the room those people would have filled. It is 14 seconds long. Several witnesses describe crying without knowing why. Several describe a feeling of recognition for something they have never experienced. Several, including Mare, in bunker Enclave 7, sitting at her kitchen table with her children, describe it as the sound of understanding something that you have always known without having language for, finally arriving in a form that the body can receive before the brain has to process it. 14 seconds. Then it is over. Silence. The Baron, on the observation deck of the fortress, hears all 3.7 million voices. He is either touched, has been since the device first activated, has perceived the unveiled infrastructure since before the unveiling made it public. He hears every voice, every branching future he consumed, in the specific sound of its first moment. He sits in his chair and listens to 14 seconds of every future he sold, and the Commission's single embedded observer reports that his expression during those 14 seconds does not change. He listens to it with the expression of a man who is listening to music he has heard before and does not especially like but recognizes. He does not weep. He does not speak. When the 14 seconds are done, he looks back at the sea. He says nothing. He is a very old man, and he has been a very old man for a very long time, and he has spent his life in the company of instruments that do not ask anything of him except his signature, and the one instrument that asked for his attention, his daughter, who read the documents, who built the worm, who encoded the archive in grief so that it could not be eaten, he filed as inventory and lost. The 72-hour Chapter 8 middle. The morning after the scream. The morning of March 16, 2047, 14 seconds after Stage 3 ends, is a morning in which the world has heard something it will not stop hearing for the rest of its existence. Not literally, the temporal fart is an acoustic event, bounded in time, with a start and an end. But the people who were present will carry the 14 seconds inside them the way people carry significant experiences inside them, not as something that happened once, but as something that keeps happening, in the bones, in the specific way that the body holds the memory of profound acoustic events long after the ears have returned to ordinary sound. The 72 hours are over. The questions are not all answered. But the ones that can be answered are. Here, in the final chapter, they are answered. Does the Baron die? Not in the 72 hours, and not from the worm. The chronostasis was purchased through transaction 043, 15 years of extension, which runs until 2046 in the Baron's original calculation, but was prolonged slightly by residual resonance in the device before the worm completed stage 1. He is alive on the morning of March 16th. He is alive in the way that very old things are alive when they have outlasted everything that sustained them, not dead, but no longer generating the force that makes aliveness meaningful. The Accord's administrative apparatus is still running. The fortress is still floating. He still sits on the observation deck. But the chrono linchpin is silent. The portal is closed. The timeline branch reserve is depleted. The Duke's file is stamped closed. He has exactly the life he built, without the device that built it, which is to say, a floating structure above drowned ruins, staffed by people whose independent agency he had removed, surrounded by a world that has just read the receipt for everything it cost to build him. He lives with this for 11 months. He dies, the Commission's record shows, of ordinary causes, in his sleep, in the chronostasis chamber, on February 3, 2048. The Duke does not attend the account closure meeting. The Duke sends the office manager. Does the son-in-law's decision matter? What does he decide? He opens the files. After 48 hours with the schematic about the HVAC seating, 48 hours of sitting with the knowledge that his loyalty was installed at maximum saturation at age 4, he makes the one decision that his subroutine architecture cannot prevent because it does not occur to the subroutine as a possible action. He opens the Accord's administrative archive and gives read access to the post-broadcast historical commission. All of it. Every operational file, every NAB directive, every Lean Devil licensing contract, every enclave management protocol. Not because he has overcome the seeding, he has not, and never will, but because the schematic showed him the seeding from the outside, and from the outside it is possible to want, at least once, to do something that is not what it would have done. It is a narrower margin. It is exactly the margin Tiffany described in her own case, the incomplete seeding that left a gap, that left a space in which something could be built that was not the devices and not the Baron's and not the Duke's. His gap is narrower than hers. He uses it once. It is sufficient. What happens to the Lean Devils and Glimpse Eaters after the broadcast? Does the unveiling reverse? Do the demonic entities lose their licenses? No, this is one of the answers Tiffany was most careful to avoid implying would be otherwise, because she knew it would be tempting to believe. The paradox worm does not undo the unveiling. It does not send the Lean Devils back to metaphor or the Glimpse Eaters back to their previous names. The infrastructure of the unveiled age continues operating on the morning of March 16th and the morning after that and every morning forward. What changes is the population's ability to read it. The grief-encoded manifesto is permanently broadcast. The worm's stage 2 payload has no shutoff. Every person in the Accords territory who has a screen will continue to receive it. The veiled, reading it repeatedly over weeks and months, began to develop the vocabulary they previously lacked, not other touch, not the ability to perceive the unveiled infrastructure with their eyes, but the ability to name what they are experiencing, to say lean devil instead of debt collector, to say glimpse eater instead of algorithm, to understand that the names are not metaphors but receipts. Naming a thing correctly does not destroy it, but it removes the thing's most durable power, which is the power of operating under a name that obscures its function. The lean devils do not disappear, but their clients start reading the contracts. What about the timeline branches, the futures that were consumed? Are they permanently gone? Is there any restoration? Permanently gone. This is the hardest answer, and Tiffany gave it clearly in the manifesto. She did not design the worm to restore what was burned. The branches cannot be regrown, they were the substrate on which the device ran, and they are consumed, and the people who would have lived in them were never born and will never be born, and the mornings that would have been theirs were sold before they could be lived, and the temporal fart was the only restoration possible, not their lives, but their names in the acoustic record, their voices in the 14 seconds that the world heard and will keep hearing in the bones. The consumed futures are the price that was paid. They stay paid. What changes is only this: the price is now legible. Everyone who hears stage 3 knows what was spent. The spent thing is not returned, but it is no longer unacknowledged. Tiffany understood, in the bones, the difference between these two things. She spent 3 years making sure the difference was undeniable. Where does Tiffany go after she dies? Is there an afterlife in this world? Does she know the worm worked? The Tiffany protocol does not address this. The manifesto does not address it. Her personal notes do not address it, which the Commission has taken as deliberate, as the choice of a woman who understood that the question of what happens after is not the question her document was designed to answer. What her document was designed to answer is, what happened before, and who caused it, and what it cost, and how the invoice was delivered. She spent her life in the architecture of the past, reading it, documenting it, and coding it in a format that could outlast the systems designed to consume it. What comes after her death she left to the living, which is where it belongs. The Post-Broadcast Commission, for its part, notes in its summary assessment that the grief-encoded broadcast has been received by every human being in the Accords territory with functioning perception, that the 14 seconds of Stage 3 have been documented across 47 acoustic arrays, that the portal is closed and the chrono linchpin is silent, and the son-in-law has opened the archive and the files are being read. It is not enough. It is not nothing. It is a receipt, delivered to the address it was always addressed to. The Commission closes its summary with the only sentence it considers adequate. She wrote it in grief. It cannot be eaten. We are reading it. Mare, in Bunker Enclave 7, watches the sun come up, the real sun, visible through the Enclave's surface-level viewport, the actual sun rather than the dawn simulation. She has been awake for 26 hours. Her children are asleep. She is at the kitchen table with a second coffee and the manifesto still open on her screen and the memory of 14 seconds still in her chest and the knowledge, which she did not have 4 days ago, that the room she lives in was built on 100 years of sold futures and demonic bureaucracy and a man who treated every person he needed as a line item and every person he didn't need as inventory. She does not know what to do with this knowledge. She does not have, this morning, a plan or a movement or a coalition or a next step. She has knowledge. She has vocabulary. She has the receipt. She has the understanding that the spare daughter read the documents and built the instrument that let the rest of them read the documents too, and that reading the documents is not the end of anything but it is where everything else has to start, because you cannot change what you cannot name and you cannot name what has been eaten before you can read it. The sun comes up. The enclave's ventilation system runs its morning cycle. Outside, in the Accords territory, the lean devils are at their desks and the glimpse eaters are indexing and the nab is attempting to calibrate its response to a broadcast it cannot suppress, and the Baron is on his observation deck above the drowned ruins watching the sea, and the Duke's scheduling office has already moved on to its next account, and the world is exactly as broken as it was 4 days ago. And Mari is at her kitchen table, reading, and across the Accords territory, others are reading, and the Paradox Swarm's Stage 2 payload is still broadcasting, to every screen, in a format that cannot be compressed. And the receipts are in the archive, with all their timestamps, in grief format, permanent, legible, unlettable. The spare daughter is dead, the documents are open. Begin reading. Grief is not data. It cannot be compressed. We are reading it. The 72 Hours Middle. A supplemental story Lockwood Chronicles Middle. All questions answered edition. The Tiffany Protocol TFF0001 Middle. The Manifesto A Narrative History of the Unveiled Age 1923 to 2047 Middle. The History Book The 72 Hours Middle. The Supplement Paradox Swarm Press Middle. Grief Encoded Middle. Glimpse Eater Resistant Stage 2 Broadcast Active Middle. Stage 3 Complete all timelines Documented Middle. All receipts Delivered Archive Status Permanent